Hello everyone, what's up? Front-end tips here. Welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Today we're going to be creating the last piece of the Elastic menu navigation animation. If you haven't checked out the first two, please go ahead and do in our channel. It's very important for you to check them out because they are basically the base for this tutorial. Today I have another announcement to tell you, and that's the new course that we are working on. It's going to be ready in a month or so. So I'm going to just go through codehouse.com, and if you go to the codehouse.com, you're going to see this kind of box over here which says Masterclass course in CSS animations. This is probably going to be the best course in CSS animations over the web. So if you want to check it out, please click on read more and sign up. And here you will see a description of the course, what things you're going to learn, and the curriculum, the whole chapters that you're going to learn. Plus the fact that, this course is actually, because we're going to put so much effort in creating this, it's going to cost like $19. But if you are one of my YouTube subscribers, I'm gonna give you a coupon code that you can use here, and instead of 19 kroner, you're gonna pay $19. You're gonna pay $13. Okay. So with that said, I'm really excited for this course to be finished, and I'm gonna update you. Please go ahead and enter your email address if you're interested, and the coupon code that I'm gonna put in the description of this video. And we're gonna make more of these courses, so stay tuned. And let's get back to the actual work today, the actual tutorial. So in the previous tutorial, I showed you how you can create this kind of animation here, this kind of dragging. Basically, it's not yet an animation. So you drag, you click, and just hold the mouse and drag it to the right, and you're gonna see this awesome sort of curviness over here based on SVG. And basically it uses the SVG tag in HTML, and we use the path tag, giving it a class menu, and then basically defining what the path should look like. And then in JavaScript using jQuery, while clicking on this gear icon, you can see that I've already added jQuery over here. And basically what happens is that when the document is ready, on the mouse down, you get the position of the initial position of the mouse, and then when you drag, the current position of the mouse, and based on those two, you basically modify the path, the original path over here. And now what we want to do is actually animate it, right? So let's get started. What I'm going to do is that first things first, I want, when I drag this, when I release it, I want the animation to start, and this menu actually expands up until here, right? So with that said, on mouse up, what we do is that we disable the mouse move, so we don't need the mouse move to kind of affect this. So this handler over here is not going to be effective anymore. So I'm going to just call a function animate here, and then now I want to define what this animate function do, right? So I'm going to define a function. I'm going to come out of the scope of this document on, and up until here inside my document ready, I'm going to define a function animate, right? And what happens really here is that I want to tell what should be the state of this curve and also this SVG path over the time that I define, right? So let's say I want to define the duration of the animation to be 1 second, which is 1000 milliseconds, right? And from the knowledge and experience, and also if you take a look at the web for it, the frame rate of most of the monitors, and in this case for this browser, is 60 frames per second, right? And that is basically what I'm going to define. So I'm going to define frame rate to be 60 frames per second, but we define the second in milliseconds, so it's going to be 60 divided by 1000, which is going to be my frame rate, right? And obviously the start of the time, the initial start of the time, obviously I'm going to define, or the first frame is going to be 0, so I'm going to say current frame, well, the frame that I'm right now on is 0, like, because the animation hasn't started yet, right? So the neat of this function actually is that inside the function, and this is the capability of JavaScript, inside of this function I define another function, and this function I name it animate curve. That's what I want to do, right? Or maybe even better, animate path. That's what I want to do. And then inside this function, what I really want to do is using a function, is a built-in function in JavaScript called request animation frame, right? What this function really does, and you can go ahead and check it out on the web, search for request animation frame, but what it really does is that it basically tells the browser what to draw, right? So basically what I'm going to pass here to request animation function is the name of the function that I created right now. So animate path, right? And then inside the animate path, I'm going to define the position or the change in the path that I want to create, right? For the starter, for example, this is the top area of my SVG, right? If you take a look at the HTML, you will see that I started from 0, 0, and then I created a line to 60 and 0. So what I really want to do now is to expand this, right? Let's say 200. So this should change to 200 when the animation ends, right? So what I'm going to do in my JavaScript, here inside the function animate, outside of the animate path frame, which is called by request animation frame, I'm going to say I want my end x to be 200, right? And then I'm going to use in JavaScript, you cannot unfortunately use CSS for this animation, you should use JavaScript, and there are some animation equations very well known as Penner equations. In order to go to find those animations, what you really need to do is go to codehouse.com and basically easings, right? codehouse.com easings, and it's gonna give you this cool animation over here, and then it switches to this interface where you can choose which kind of animation timing function you want to use. So for example, this one, if I play this, you'll see that it kind of is ease in quad, so it starts really slow and then fast, and then for example this one is the other way around, so it starts faster and then it ends slowly. So what I in this case, in this animation, I'm going to use ease out elastic, right? So if you play that, you'll see this elasticity happening, right? And in order to get the function, you basically scroll down, you switch to JavaScript tab, and then basically copy this function all along. So I'll copy this, Command C or Control C, going back to my JavaScript pane here, I'm going to just paste it in my document ready so that I have the function over here. So now what I really need to do, inside the animate path, I'm going to call this function. And then here I'm going to tell you what exactly these arguments mean. So T basically stands for current time or current frame. And my current frame is defined over here, right? So I'm going to paste that current frame. And then the next argument is B, which stands for beginning state of my animation. So we really know that the beginning state for this top part is 60, right? So what I'm going to say here is put the 60, and then the third parameter here, or argument here, is C, which stands for change. Basically, it means that from the start or the beginning up until the end, the change, I have to add it here. I know that the end state or the end x I want it to be is over here, for example, somewhere 200, and then the beginning is 60. So what I really need to put here is end x minus 60, which stands for the amount of change that this position will have. And then finally, the D stands for the total animation time, or in this case, because I created frame, is the total number of frames. And to be able to get the total number of frames, it's super easy. It's duration multiplied by the frame rate, right? So I'm going to define a new variable here, call it total frames, and then I say duration multiplied by frame rate, right? So basically this one, which is the multiplication of my frame rate, and then by duration, you will see that the ultimate value for total frame is 60. So there is going to be 60 frames that happen in this animation. And I'm going to put this total frames at the end of. And this basically, these functions return the new value that I need to choose for my path to move this, right? So this basically, I'm going to create a new variable called new x, not give it any value, and then I say new x equals to is out elastic. And this basically gives, this function basically gives me the new value of x that I need to set over here. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do for the set path function, I'm going to give it an x parameter over here as well, and then I'm going to replace this with this x, right? I'm using the string function, so I need to actually, in JavaScript using plus, I'm going to pass this x over here, right? And then return it. So here what happens is that this new x that I created, I will pass it to this function. So what I'm going to do is that I say menu, and this is totally jQuery, so menu.attr attribute, because this is the attribute D that I want to update, right? And specifically this part of it. So in order to do that, I'm going to say, in this function, I'm going to say menu.attr, and then I pass D, because that's the attribute I want to set, and then I call the function that I created here, setPath, and then I will pass the new x value that I have over here, and then as you know, I have to pass the curve here. But the curve in the previous tutorial, we set it over here in this function, so that I cannot use it here in the animate function. So what I will do is that I'm going to just copy this var and then move it way outside of all these functions. So basically define it as the global variable here, right? And then in the initial value is 0. As you can see, there is no curve, so 0. And then here, I basically remove this var, so this became a global variable. And now here in my animate function, I can use that, right? So this is how you do that. And then ultimately, because here when I use the mouse up function, I call this animate. So basically when I drag this, right, I want the animate to be called. In this animate, I need to basically call this animate path function to kickstart it, right? So again, just to go over what I'm doing here, and then obviously here, because this function set path has this new x value, and that x value we know by heart that is initially 60, I'm just going to put 60 over here, right? And then if I drag this, well, nothing happens, but what I really want to do here is that when I drag this, when I mouse up, basically I release the mouse, this should happen, this handler will happen, right? And then the animate function will get called, and then let's go to the animate function. I define the duration of the animation, the frame rate, the total number of frames that my animation will have based on the duration, which is going to be duration multiplied by the frame rate. The current frame that I have is 0, and then the end position of this point here, which is 60 right now, is going to be 200. And then I created a function, and then I kickstart the function, and when this function gets called, these are the things that happen. So I use the isOutElastic function to create the new x value, and then I set that new x value using the setPath function that I created in the previous tutorial. And then when it reaches here, it again requests animation frames, basically calling this function again and again and again and again. So what is missing right now here is that my current frame should increase by the number of 1 each time this animation gets called using request animation frame. So current frame will be 0, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. One thing we need to make sure is that this animation, this request animation function, will call this animation sort of infinitely, right? But since we know the duration and we know the total number of frames that we have, we just do a check here. We do if current frame, which is increasing by 1 every frame that we call this animation frame, I will check if current frame is more than total frames, which means that the animation is supposedly should be finished. I just return. right? And this return effectively stop this animation path, animate path function, right? So what happens right now, if I start dragging and releasing it, you will see that I have this cool elastic animation, basically changing the X position here, which was originally 60 to 200, right? So just to run it again, you'll see that, boom, so it kind of animates. The second thing is obviously the second animation that should happen, apart from this, is the curvature. So the curvature is what we kind of create using the mouse down and mouse move, right? So again, this is going to be the curve that we created, which creates over here, and it's on a global variable, right? So the next thing is that I will create a new curve here, variable, and then exactly copying and pasting this function, but this time for the curve, for the new curve that I created, right? So here I have the current frame, which is correct. The starting position for the curve is obviously whenever I stop here, right? So this is going to be the curve. This is going to be this curve function, curve variable that I basically defined here, right? And then the difference is that I want here to become 0, right? So the end state is 0 minus curve. This is going to be the change, right? And then the total frames is going to be, sorry, this is the wrong function. So this is going to be curve, and this is going to be 0 minus curve, right? And the total frames will be total frames. So this is the new curve that basically gets generated using the ease out elastic, passing the current frame that we are in, passing the curve, which is the starting point, 0 minus curve, because at the end we want this to be, the curvature to be 0, then also passing the total frames. And then here, instead of curve, I will pass new curve, right? Now if I run the animation, you will see that, boom, it kind of starts having this super nice animation and then gets to the 0. But the problem though here is that this new curve based on this function gets different values, positive and negative. And in order to include that, basically see, this doesn't look really realistic because the value of the curve is always positive, so we don't have that nice elasticity going on. And in order to do that, I'm going to come here to set path, right? Depending on the curve value, which is either plus 0 or minus 0, and that is basically coming from the ease out elastic function, I'm going to just define a variable called path, and then I paste it over here. I paste this over here, right? And then I return this path. So the direction of the curve is defined on this one, on this number over here. What I'm going to do is that I will create a direction variable over here, and then based on the curve, if curve less than or equal to 0, I will set the direction to be 1, otherwise else, which is if the curve value is more than 0, I set the direction to 0, right? And then here, instead of this, I will use JavaScript string function, and then I pass this direction, right? So if the curve number is less than 0, put the direction to 1, otherwise put the direction to 0. Now what happens is that, you see, this is the problem. We don't want that, because here instead of 1 and 0, I have to choose 0 and 1, right? Now if I do that, boom, you'll see up here how cool the elasticity is. So basically, boom, this is how you create this awesome animation. So I hope you liked this tutorial. Once again, I'm going to go over it real quick. What you do is that when the mouse up happens, basically when you drag this and then release the mouse, that's when this mouse up event handler gets called. Basically what we do using jQuery is setting the mouse move event handler off, effectively just disabling it, and then calling the animate function. And the meat is this animate function. We define the duration of our animation, The frame rate is obviously 60 frames per second, so 60 divided by 1000 milliseconds. Total number of frames is always the multiplication of the duration by the frame rate, and then the current frame when the animation starts is obviously 0. Then for the top X over here, basically what we're moving or changing is this value and also this value, right? And effectively at the end, the direction, this one, right? So what we really do is in the animate function is that we, inside the animate function, we create another function, animate path, right? And then we kickstart it down here. And then what happens in the animate function, we increase the current frame by 1. Effectively, it's like a loop that gets called using request animation frame. And then using ease out elastic taken from the easings function in the code tools, I'm going to put the link down there. Then you basically pass the parameters, the current frame, the beginning value of the attribute that we want to animate, the change, which is the end value minus the beginning value, and the total number. And then having that, we have this set path function that we define. And then basically you get that value, you set that value, and also check if the current frame is more than the total frames, we have to stop the animation, right? So basically, this is how you create elasticity. It's a little bit difficult for those of you who are sort of beginners to intermediate. Please just go ahead and, just watch the tutorial again and again. If you have any questions, please direct to the comment section down there. I will be very happily answering those. And please subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Then again, don't forget the course that we talked about. There's going to be another course about JavaScript animations like this, which we will be working. It's going to come out in 2 months. So very excited, and I wish you a very good day and night. Goodbye.